So today we're going to talk about the Sony FX6 and the Sony FX3. Which one should you buy? We're getting some coffee. Cheers. So every single morning I get some espresso and I hang out with my Valor crew here and Joey sometimes, and it's always a great time. So thank you, Valor Coffee. Okay, so before we actually talk about the Sony FX3 and the FX6, we need to set up a little interview setup for our talk. It's a nice hot day in Alpharetta, Georgia. I got a bunch of crap in this car that I didn't take out for my last shoot, so. But it's convenient because now I have a lot of lighting. We're getting there, okay. This espresso, it's feeling good. It worked. You gonna do this? All right, first, protein. Today, we ran 13 miles. If you haven't already watched the 50K, Journey to 50K video, you should, because it should be good. Okay, so we are talking about these two cameras right here. The Sony FX6 and the Sony FX3. These cameras, two really big different price points, but in many ways they're very much the same camera. And that's why a lot of people, they ask me, hey, which camera should I buy? Should I buy the Sony FX6 or the FX3? And I think that there are a couple things that are different about the cameras that can maybe help your decision, maybe make it easier for you to buy or not. So let's talk about what are the major differences from the camera. So really the camera, they're the same. But two of the biggest differences with the camera are the Sony FX6 has a camera menu that's kind of clunky and hard to go through. It's kind of in the same line of the Sony FS7 if you've ever used that camera before, the Sony FX9, and the Sony FX3 won't have the same camera menu as this. So that is a big difference. Another thing is you have all these bells and whistles and you just don't have that on the FX3. But some of the biggest things that kind of separate this camera for me personally, someone that shoots like a lot of sports content, kind of documentary style filming, there's one thing for me that makes it to where I put this nice camera down and I pick up this camera right here, the Sony FX3. Now, I film at a thing called the CrossFit Games every single year, and our whole entire team, we film on this camera. And we specifically choose this camera to film on. And there's one major difference that separates this camera from me. One thing is that these cameras can both shoot 120 frames per second, which is amazing. Getting to shoot sports moments at 120 frames per second is cool. You can, really slow things down and it just looks awesome whenever fast moving things are going slow. But with the Sony FX6, whenever you're shooting 120 frames per second, you have to push this button called S&Q. S&Q mode is a mode that slows down your footage for you automatically. So whenever you go into your editing software, your post-production, it already slows it down, which is nice. You can kind of see what it looks like, but one thing that you lose with the Sony FX6 when you're shooting 120 frames per second is your audio. You don't have any audio, but this little guy, if you go in your menu, you select like you normally would, 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second. You can also select 120 frames per second. And you can film like you normally would with any other camera, and whenever you play it back in your editing software or just playing it back on the camera, it plays it back in real time, but in 120 frames per second files. which is huge because one thing that you're getting with that is audio. I think having audio is incredibly important. If you're trying to make something feel real, you're trying to get a little bit more depth out of your edit, is making sure that you have audio with it. And getting that with the Sony FX3 is why I love it for sports moments, shooting sports, and also just smaller. So there's many things about these cameras that we can go in depth and talk about, but this is by no means a video that's showcasing each and everything that's different about these cameras. But for me and my job and what I do, this is what really separates these two cameras. But the question is, why do I have them both in, and what other cases can I use it for? So primarily, probably 80% of the time I'm shooting on this camera. I love it because of the internal NDs. It's really easy for me to change the settings of my camera quickly and fast. With this camera, it's a little bit more difficult to change my settings. It's a little bit more clunky to get to things. So you never know when there's a moment that's happening and you need to press record automatically. Maybe you have your camera on the wrong settings and now you miss the moment. This guy, you pretty much, camera turns on extremely fast, you're ready to roll. So often what my setups are like if I'm going and filming at places is I have this Sony FX6 for kind of like my normal camera, going around, asking people questions, filming some other things. And then I have this camera set up on a wider angle lens on a gimbal, and I'm rolling around on the gimbal. So I have two cameras that I can kind of bounce in between to get different styles of content. And yeah, those are the biggest reasons why I love matching these two and pairing these two. You get the same image quality, but two different sizes, which is awesome. So I hope that you enjoyed this video talking about the Sony FX6 and FX3. This is the major thing for me that has separated these two cameras, is really that 120 frames per second. And maybe that helps you, maybe you need more information. I'm sure that there's a ton of other videos out there about this, but I just want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and I just appreciate everybody that is subscribed or commented or liked. It does mean a lot to me, and I love getting to see that. So comment below, what do you think about these cameras? Do you agree with what I'm saying? Do you disagree? I would love to hear, any comments. But subscribe, and peace.